Thank you. Please be seated. Close the session.
All right, so jurors, when we were doing scheduling, and I know scheduling has changed a lot in this case, but my main goal is to get this case to you folks by next week, when we all want the case to you by next week. So originally on the 21st, we were either going to do a whole day, and then we couldn't do it all whole day, and it was all of this back and forth, and it was a half a day, and it was because I had something scheduled in this courthouse that was not going to be continued through forces that we weren't aware of. It is going to be continued tomorrow. So in light of that, I would like us, and we will be doing a whole day. I understand that for one of you, that you planned on an earlier stop to the weekend or a vacation day or something from the afternoon on. But really, all I'm asking of you is to go from, instead of a 1 o'clock stop, to a 4 o'clock stop. And where I guess 14 of you are able to do that, we're going to do that. So tomorrow will be a full day. Okay? I don't know who I'm inconveniencing, but I apologize for that. Because when I said emergency, an early start for the weekend is not an emergency. All right, could we call the witness back, please?
Trooper, same thing. Would you mind holding the step up? And you remain on the floor. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
So with reference to this case, this investigation, who, if anyone besides you, created any cell-right reports or extractions from any of the phones involved in this case?
Other than the AG's office, it was just myself.
And now you had mentioned that there was some deleted material from the defendant's phone from the afternoon of January 29, 2022. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And what was that was deleted?
There were some search items that were not there in the phone that found cookies related to said searches and websites visited.
So as far as search terms or web history, were those the areas that were deleted?
Yes, that's correct.
I have nothing further.
Oh, okay. Okay, so we brought you back for that, Trooper. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Your next witness, Mr. Lally.
Yes, Your Honor. The Commonwealth called Dr. Renee Stonebridge to the stand.
Okay.
You can please watch it and face it.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give to the court and the jury in the matter now pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you.
Great. So once you sit, I'm going to tell you that you have to keep your voice up. We want to keep our air conditioning on. So just if you'd speak loudly into the microphone, that would be great. Yes, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Lally.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Okay, good morning, good morning. Hey, Ray, what's going on? I know it's almost not the morning anymore. We are doing a Sunday catch-up. My shirt, I am disheveled. It is Sunday. We have to catch up. Day and a half court. We have half 28 and day of 29. I do have a 3 o'clock meeting. I might leave the trial running as I have that. I shouldn't, and I don't know how long it's gonna be. Shouldn't be too long. Depending on where we're at, I'll leave it running or not. Maybe we'll just kind of take a break, but let's get back into it. We are starting the next witness. If you are just joining, there's like 2 questions left of this, of the Guarino guy. Internet is being super weird again. I am so sorry, but we have to catch up. This trial is getting so close to being done. Let's see what we got.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the jury?
Yes, my name is Renee Stonebridge. Last name Stonebridge, STONEBRIDGE.
And what do you do for work?
I am employed through the Chief Medical Examiner's Office at Boston as Director of Cardiac and Neuropathology and Medical Examiner.
Now, if I could ask you just a few questions about sort of your educational and work history background, if that's all right.
Yes.
Starting with your bachelor's degree, where did you go and what, if any, area did you receive a degree in?
So I went to SUNY at Stony Brook in New York. I was a double major in biology and Germanic languages and literature. I graduated with a Bachelor's of Science degree.
After that, I went to the American University of Antigua for medical school, and I graduated with honors, magna cum laude. After that, I did a 4-year combined anatomic and clinical pathology residency program at NYU Winthrop Hospital in Long Island, New York. After that, I did a 1-year forensic pathology fellowship at the Boston office of the chief medical examiner. And after that, I did a 2-year neuropathology fellowship program through Brown University at Rhode Island Hospital.
And doctor, are you board
Green is
certified?
her color.
Yes, I am board certified in
like
anatomic
I said.
pathology, clinical pathology, forensic pathology, and neuropathology.
And if you could just explain to the jury a little bit about what does board certified mean?
Board certification means that every medical specialty has their own board. So for example, the American Board of Pathology dictates whether or not you can be board certified based on certain criteria. So you have to meet certain criteria, meaning that you have to complete a certain number of surgical specimens, a certain number of autopsies. And then once you meet that criteria, you can take an exam, which if you pass, leads to your board certification.
Now, if I could ask you just a couple, and your board certification is up to date at this point, is that correct?
Yes,
In each of those areas that you just spoke of?
yes.
Now, if I could ask you some general terms as far as if you could define them for the jury. First of all, what is pathology in a general sense?
Pathology is essentially the study of any sort of disease or abnormal state of the body tissues. So anything that can go wrong in the body and any of the body systems is essentially the study of pathology.
And now, starting with anatomic pathology, what is anatomic pathology more specifically?
Anatomic pathology consists of the study of surgical specimens. So for example, if someone goes to the hospital to have a tumor removed, that specimen will go to pathology. The pathologist will look at it, cut it, look at specimens under the microscope, order any ancillary tests if necessary, and then make a diagnosis, which is then conveyed to the clinician. Anatomic pathology also consists of cytopathology, which is looking at individual cells, and then it also consists of autopsy pathology.
And as far as clinical pathology, what is that?
Clinical pathology is anything that is lab related in pathology. So if you have to get blood
Morning,
drawn
David. How are
and the
you?
results come back, that is clinical pathology. If there's any sort of blood work that needs
I
to be
hope
done,
you
for
are
example, if you're
well.
going to have a surgery and they have to cross match.
This trial has been absolutely wild. Absolutely wild. And I know I'm an idiot, but like I'm not that much of an idiot, and like nothing is making sense.
And type U in case of a blood transfusion. That's considered clinical pathology. Also microbiology, so anything infectious. So essentially anything that goes through a lab is clinical pathology.
And what is forensic pathology?
Forensic pathology is the study of autopsies in a medical legal sense. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's always going to be something that is legal. Sometimes it may be just a person who has not seen a doctor in many years, dies at home. There's no physician that is willing to sign a death certificate. So we work on those types of cases, plus anything that is not natural.
Now, neuropathology, what is that?
Neuropathology is the study of the brain, spinal cord, eyes, muscles, and nerves.
And if you could, just again, in general terms, as far as casework is concerned, related to your work as a director of neuropathology, what is the
needs to be saved for a neuropathologic analysis. So upon following that criteria, if the brain is saved, it gets put into formalin, which essentially fixes the brain so it firms it up, so it makes it easier to analyze. So after the brain has been fixed, I usually let them fix about 2 weeks. Sometimes it could be a little more, a little less, depending on circumstances.
I think we are back. I'm gonna go make sure that like the whole building is back, or if it's just like some random glitch. I don't know.
We'll then look at the brain, take photographs of it from all sides, and then cut the brain, take photographs, document any sort of abnormalities. And then if I feel the need to take sections to look at under the microscope, then I will take those sections. They will be processed through histology. I will look at the slides. Sometimes you may have to add in additional testing, for example, immunohistochemistry, to see if there's anything in particular that you cannot maybe diagnose solely on looking at the histology. And then once that is done, I will issue a report to the medical examiner, and then they use it in terms of determining their cause and manner of death, if necessary.
Now, as far as that formalin process, as far as the solution is concerned, is there a typical time period that the brain would have to be in that solution prior to you examining it or cutting it or any of those other things?
Usually about 2 weeks, give or take maybe a few days here and there, but I usually try to let them fix at least 10 days minimum.
And again, in general terms, with respect to the types of cases that are referred to you, what types of cases are typically referred to you?
So part of the criteria that we use is that any cases for children or babies under the age of 2 years, those always come to me. Also, if there is any cases that have blunt head trauma that may be suspicious or homicidal in nature, those will typically come to me as well. Some of the other cases may be just a difficult neuropathologic entity that a non-neuropath trained medical examiner may not be able to really diagnose. And then sometimes there's cases that are just surprise cases where the medical examiner opens up the head and they see something interesting or abnormal, and they decide to save that case for me to look at further.
Now, with respect to the cases that you do see, at some point did you become involved in analysis or testing of a brain belonging to John O'Keefe?
Yes.
And who was the doctor that was the medical examiner that made that referral in this case?
It was Dr. Irini Scordi-Bello.
And with respect to your analysis here, obviously you looked at the brain. What, if any, other sources of information did you review or did you look at in ultimately formulating your opinion in this case?
So at the time when I was able to cut the brain of Mr. O'Keefe, I had information that was relayed to us from our intake department. So when a case gets called into the medical examiner, it gets taken by the intake department and they're given kind of just a rough summary of the case. I also had the police report, I had the EMS report, I had the medical records from when Mr. O'Keefe was in the hospital. I also had medical records from the primary care physician. I had autopsy photos, and I also had, I believe just refer to my notes here because I had a lot of notes. I also had the inventory and tracking sheets, which are notes created by the medical examiner, and the neuropath request itself.
Now, are you familiar with some terms in relation to injuries that you would observe as far as from a neuropathological perspective, as far as injuries being acute, subacute, or remote?
Yes.
And can you explain to the jury sort of what those are and what those mean?
So it depends on circumstances. Acute generally is something that happened within a very short time frame. So when I refer to something as being acute, I usually refer to that as something that's occurring from the time of an injury to maybe a day or so afterwards. As I said, it's variable, dependent on circumstances. Subacute is something that has not happened within the last few minutes, few hours, maybe even a day, and maybe something that is now in the process of healing. And then chronic is usually something that has happened a while ago in the past. You may see some sort of evidence of some type of injury in a chronic state. You may also not see any evidence because it may have completely healed by that point.
And so from your analysis in this case, how did you characterize, in your opinion, from everything that you reviewed as far as the injuries you observed in Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
The injuries I observed were acute injuries, meaning that they probably occurred minutes to hours.
Now, if I could turn your attention to your findings as far as when you conducted your analysis and your testing in this particular case, what, if anything, did you find as far as injuries to Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
So when I look at the brain, what I do is I look at all surfaces from all sides. And one of the things that I look for is anything grossly obvious, meaning anything I can look at the brain and see that there's something there that shouldn't be there. So one of the first things I noticed was a subarachnoid hemorrhage. And subarachnoid hemorrhage is something that occurs when you have bleeding within the leptomeninges. The leptomeninges are a very thin membrane that encase the brain and the spinal cord, and there should not be blood freely floating within the leptomeninges. So if you have a subarachnoid hemorrhage, most of the time the causes are either a ruptured aneurysm, which is something I would see upon cutting the brain, or some type of trauma. So that was the first finding.
Can I stop you there just for a second? Of those taking notes and for our court reporter, could you spell the type of hemorrhage and the membrane?
Yes. Subarachnoid is SUBARACHNOID. And leptomeninges, LEPTOMENINGES.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Now, with regard to anything related to the aneurysm that you indicated that you would have seen, what, if anything, did you see during the course of your review or testing or analysis of Mr. O'Keefe's brain?
So aneurysms are typically seen in the cerebral vessels that sit around the base of the brain. So there's something called the circle of Willis, which is the main arterial supply. It sits around the base of the brain, and it's kind of shaped like a circle that has vessels that come off that extend to other areas of the brain. So typically, if there is an aneurysm that is ruptured, it's going to be located somewhere in one of those vessels. So upon observing those vessels, I did not see any evidence of any aneurysm or any sort of natural disease state that might have led to a rupture in one of these vessels. Also, sometimes these vessels, since they do go deep into the brain, you may only see the rupture upon cutting the brain. And I did not see any evidence of any rupture of any of these vessels anywhere in the brain.
Now, as far as the subarachnoid hemorrhage that you observed, where was that located within the brain, if you could?
So the subarachnoid hemorrhage was on the frontal poles, which is essentially right here in the front of the brain. So the frontal lobes obviously sit in the front, and then the poles are the very frontmost portion of the brain. So it was on the frontal poles. It was also on the left temporal pole. So the temporal region is right here in the temporal region. And because of the way that the temporal lobe is shaped, it kind of has a little loop right in the front. So it has a pole as well. So it was on the left temporal pole. And then it was also in the left lateral fissure. So you have a frontal pole here. You have the temporal lobe right here. And then the lateral fissure goes kind of in between the temporal and the frontal lobe. So you have the hemorrhage here, and then hemorrhage right there. So it's kind of all concentrated almost in one area. But then there was also hemorrhage of the posterior surface of the right temporal as well. So on this side.
Now, doctor, I'm probably going to butcher this horribly, but just as far as the bilateral unci, are you familiar with that?
Yes. So the unci are the medial portion of the temporal lobes. So the brain is essentially oriented in a way that each hemisphere, the right and left hemisphere, are the same. The unci are the most inner portion of the temporal lobe.
Yes, definitely. I don't know why this is happening. There's apparently weather happening that's affecting us. So apologies, but oh my gosh, it is just, I have the worst internet luck for everything I've ever done. Sorry.
Lobes. So the unci sit just next to the brainstem. So if you have anything that causes herniation of these unci, they start to push inwards onto the brainstem. So say this is the brainstem, here the unci, they start to push in. And because the brain is within the skull is hard, you have no room for any sort of expansion of the brain. If there is herniation, it will start to push in that area because the brainstem turns into the spinal cord and goes out of the skull through the foramen magnum. So you have this hole about this big or so at the base of the skull where the brainstem turns to the spinal cord, then comes out. So that's one of the only areas in which the brain can actually move because it's encased in the hard skull. So if you have herniation, it'll start to push and then push downwards.
Could I ask you to spell unci?
UNCI.
And with reference to this bilateral unci area, what, if any, herniation did you observe?
So when the unci herniate, it can be subtle. Sometimes if it's herniated enough, you may see hemorrhages in the brainstem. And this happens because this tissue is now pushing on the brainstem and it's essentially being compressed. So there was herniation noted, and then there was hemorrhage within the brainstem.
Now, if I could ask you, doctor, just to You familiar with the term, or medical term known as a contusion?
Yes.
And can you explain just in general?
Blood that's coming out from a blood vessel. It's a blood vessel that has been broken in some way, and now there's blood coming out.
Are you also familiar with another term, part of that term, known as a punctate contusion?
Yes, so punctate is essentially just a way to describe the size of a contusion. When I say punctate, I need something that's very, very tiny. It almost just like a dot.
And with respect to punctate contusion, what, if anything, did you observe in this O'Keefe's brain, and where was it located?
So there were punctate contusions in the frontal and temporal cortices. So frontal, once again, is the front portion right here. Temporal is kind of right behind it in this area. And the cortex is the gray matter of the brain. So it's a thin strip that kind of just goes around the brain. And then the white matter is underneath all that. So in traumatic injuries, you can see punctate contusions or even larger contusions in the cortex. It usually indicates that the brain has been pushed against something, which is now causing these little blood vessels to rupture, hence seeing the contusions because the blood is no longer contained in the blood vessels.
Now, doctor, with regard to the subarachnoid hemorrhage, is there anything that you're able to do as far as measuring that?
It's hard to measure because it's usually it can spread, so it may be thicker in one area, thinner in another. So you may have some that may appear just as a very faint hemorrhage, and then some that might be very thick, which you can physically measure. So I usually just give an area where it is and say it's here, it's there, because it's almost like measuring something that has blurred edges. You can't really get a completely accurate measurement.
And what, if anything, were you able to observe or measure with regard to subarachnoid hemorrhage in the area of the left prefrontal lobe?
So it appears.
I'm so sorry. I'm trying to push through, but this is like one of the worst experiences. I am so sorry. I can't even add a banner to let people know who might be popping in that this is happening. I am so incredibly sorry. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. I want to cry. I want to cry. I'm so incredibly sorry. Okay. All right, I'm gonna close the stream and we'll restart once we have good Wi-Fi again. Again, I'm so sorry to hear this.